In this lesson, we'll begin to use some of the sculpting tools in Cinema 4D to shape our model. So I'm going to change the layout from standard to sculpting, and that'll give us a bunch of these sculpting tools, and this is going to allow us to do something a little bit different with our polygon model. Let's go to our Use Model tool. Now I'm using a Wacom pen, and it's an Intuos tablet along with the grip pen that goes along with that. So it's going to be pressure sensitive, so it's going to be the best way to go about doing this. We use Wacom products in all of our courses. We highly recommend those, but if you have another kind of tablet, the important thing is that the pressure sensitivity is there so that you can begin sculpting on this in a very intuitive way. So the first thing that we need to do is hit this subdivide. And when we hit this, it's not going to change visually, but you'll see over here that we now have this level 0. When you have kind of a slider here, we also have this base object listed. If we go into our objects, object manager, you'll see that there's now a sculpt tag that has been added to our model. That's going to allow us to sculpt. Now, before we actually subdivide this anymore, it hasn't subdivided it. All it did was add the tag, but we can still sculpt on the low resolution mesh, and it's just kind of an intuitive way of shaping this at this point. So let's grab the grab tool here, and what we want to happen is I want to do this symmetrically. So within the grab tool, you can see that there's an area for symmetry. Let's turn on symmetry across the X, and so we can sort of see where that's happening there. And I also want to link the symmetry so that that'll be linked to the other brushes that we choose. All right, now I can come in and I can change the size of the brush by middle mouse dragging sideways. Okay. And then once I get it to the place I want it, I can come in here and I can begin to just click and drag, and it's basically just taking these points, and we're just able to sort of shift them around a little bit very quickly. Let's come into the back and we'll sort of pull these in a bit. Now once we've done that, let's subdivide this a little bit more. Well, let's actually take this eyelid out past the eye a bit. So we have the eye here, the eye shape here to be able to match it to, so that's good. Let's bring this out a little bit. Let's hit subdivide again. So now we've hit subdivide again, so we have more polygons now that we can work with. We can move down, up and down the subdivision levels here by hitting these buttons, or we can use our slider here. But now we can come in, and maybe our brush size is a little bit smaller, but we can still use grab at this point because we're so low res. We can start to kind of build in the basic structure here. So if there's any shape changes that need to happen, we can do that. Let's subdivide again and again. We can turn off our lines, and you can see we can get up into, we're at 74,000 polygons at this point, which is fairly high. Let's go ahead and go to pull now, and pull will allow us to pull out detail. So it's, instead of grabbing, we're stroking across the surface, and then we're able to sort of raise that detail. If I hit shift and stroke, I can smooth that back into the surface. Okay, so now I can, with this particular brush, I can drag sideways to change the brush size, or I can drag up and down to change the pressure. So I'm going to bring this eyelid out a little bit and start to add in some sort of wrinkling across here, maybe coming across the back, and just sort of adding a little bit of detail in here. And there are different kinds of brushes that you can experiment with. The wax brush is cool. It kind of gives the impression of adding material on. And so what we want to do is just come in here and start to add a little bit of this detail. We can come in and add a bit of detail along the legs, kind of smooth that out a little. Okay, we can use the knife to cut areas in. You can see how that's cutting those areas in a little bit, and come back in and sort of smooth them out a bit. You can also jump back down to a level and smooth it out at that level, and that'll help a little bit as well. You can also go in and use something like flatten. So if you wanted to just flatten out this part right here, you could sort of flatten that area right around the eye. Come in here and kind of do the same thing. Maybe flatten that area out and then use pinch to kind of pinch those edges together a little bit. Okay, and we could sort of use the knife to bring in a bit of a crease here at the corner of the eye. Kind of come in here. We could come underneath here and begin to add some sort of divisions across the bottom of our tentacles here, depending on how we want to do that. And bring those lines across here. And we'll just do the same thing on these other ones. And they're symmetrical, so that should work fine. Could sort of come in here and add a little bit of detail coming across here. And kind of smooth that back out. We can also come in along here and start to build out. Let's use wax. Kind of in these areas, sort of start to build those out a little bit. On the inside of our tentacles. So just have a little fun with it. What you do doesn't matter so much as just knowing when you subdivide how to do that, and then to start to bring that detail in. Okay, so at some point you can start to bring in some smaller scale wrinkles and kind of define these a little bit more. So, you know, underneath the eye, can kind of smooth that back out a little bit. Can add a little bit more detail coming in here on the corner of the eye. Maybe this sort of curves back. We can also, if we hold down Control, we can push in areas and then smooth them out with Shift. So you can go very quickly from pulling out to pushing in to smoothing just with a couple of clicks. And go back in with your knife and sort of add some of those lines in there coming across. Like I said, just have a little fun with it. You can always go back also and use grab to shape. Keep in mind when you're using this at a high level that you can have the tendency to create sort of lumpy effects as we're doing kind of here. And so just be aware of that. You know, sometimes you might want to come down, back down to the lower levels and do it there. So if we want to give this guy a little bit more of an attitude, you can sort of bring this down a bit. And then we can go back up and begin to sculpt from there. I'll start to sculpt in the wrinkles here. Okay. So let's spend a little bit of time just adding some of this detail. You might also want to take some detail kind of coming up this way. Wax might be a good option to do that as well. As it's sort of, he's got this sort of frown. You can come in and start to add some detail going in that direction as well. And then you can sort of pinch those lines together to create the lines, maybe smooth them back out a bit. All right, so we'll spend a little bit of time adding some detail there, and then in the next lesson, we'll add some high frequency skin detail.